Thank you very much. My name is Iain Bishop. I'm CEO of Damilah Technology. So Damilah Technology is a development services company which I founded about 3 years ago. I'm based in the UK and I have a team of about 135 people in North Macedonia working for me. So prior to starting Damilah, I was a CTO for about 20 to 25 years, working for a variety of different product software companies. So going from smaller software companies, owner, founder, managed businesses, to publicly quoted software companies, to private equity-backed software companies. My last permanent CTO role was for a company called Allocate Software, and I'll be alluding to them during this session as they're an example of what I'm recommending here as something to think about for the future. So I joined them in 2011 and I left them in 2019, so over 8 years. The team grew from about 20 people to 300 by the time I left. And we went from being publicly quoted on AIM, taken private by HG Capital, PE House, and then sold by HG, and then another investor came in for a period, and then I moved on. During my career, I've worked with teams all over the world. With my own teams, I've had in Holland, Germany, Australia, Sweden, America. I've set up my own teams offshore in China. I did that in 2001. I set up teams in North Macedonia twice now, and also Bulgaria. And I've worked with third parties in the usual places, India, China, Philippines, Vietnam, and Poland. It's all relevant, which we'll come on to shortly as I go through. But during my career, I've not just been involved in scaling up, I've also been involved in scaling down teams. And we all know how tough that is. I'm sure many of us have been through that process, particularly over the last few years. There's one thing sitting in a board meeting or a management meeting and understanding the rationale why the company needs to reduce its costs, reduce its overheads, and unfortunately we tend to sit in the overhead column. But it's another thing when we have to have those conversations face to face with people. They're not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they're not just heads, these are people who, as a good CTO, we will have looked to develop, to grow, we would have invested time with them, got to know them well, maybe even got to know their families too. It's really, really tough. Really tough. And I've been through it a couple of times, as I'm sure many people here have as well. So over the years, I've by accident and by the way things worked out, I've evolved a structure which I think helps to protect me and my team, but also gives the company what it needs to. So the structure that I've evolved is one where obviously you have your core team onshore, the use of a third party for flexible resourcing, and then also creating the nearshore teams to minimize the cost for the team and add the most value. So that's what I have worked out in the past, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. Because, hopefully things are getting better in markets, and if we have the opportunity to start growing teams, I think it's really important to think ahead, because what goes up may well come down again. Who knows the impact that Donald Trump being president of the US is going to have on markets here in the future. And we've been through so many major things with the pandemic and Russia invading Ukraine, etc. Things happen which are outside of our control, and I just think we have to be wary of that as we look to grow our businesses. Okay, so the three teams, I'm going to talk about them a little bit. The first team then is your core team onshore. This is probably where you have your domain skills, maybe where you have people who've been working in your business for many years, maybe your architectural skills. It's where your IP resides in your business. And obviously that's a really important team, and we want to maintain that. The second team is the third party. And when I was at Allocate, for example, I joined them they were about 20 people. We acquired a small business about similar size. And then they brought with them a third party in Poland. And throughout my whole period during that time, I worked with the third party. They allowed me to have the flexibility to create teams quickly. They also allowed me to not recruit to my maximum capacity, because you never know when you might need to drop it down. And I think having maybe 10 to 20% of your full number of people in your team working with a third party gives you that flexibility and reassurance that if things go bad, you've got a place to go, because it's a lot easier to reduce the size of a third party team than it is to reduce the size of your own team. When looking at third parties, I think it's really important to find somebody who will act as a partner. I think the best relationships are one where they really feel like an extension to your own team, that you don't have the customer-supplier sort of relationship. You have common goals, you work together. I think that's a really important thing. Have that face-to-face time with the partner to really ensure people understand what's needed. You know, at the end of the day, we're dealing with people here, whether they work for you or for somebody else on your projects, they're people. And if you spend the time to share the vision, help them to understand the why, they will really go that much further for you. The third team then is the nearshore team, your own captive nearshore team. As I said, I've set that up when I was at Allocate. I set that up in Macedonia. People always ask me why Macedonia. So to tell you, when I was at the company, we were looking to buy a business. I was under some pressure to outsource. I couldn't quite, to reduce costs, I couldn't quite get Poland and Romania to work financially. But then we were looking to buy a business, and they had a team in Macedonia, and the cost model was a lot lower because they were outside the EU. And they told me they were great, so I went and had a look. I think, you know, if you're looking at setting up your own team in a nearshore place, it's really important to put your feet on the ground, go and have a look, go and talk to people who've done it there themselves before, so you can find out all the sort of cultural nuances, the differences. Is this a place that you can work with? Does it fit with the culture in your business? I'll give you a few examples of some of the differences in culture I'm going to pick on North Macedonia just because it's so current in my mind. So, for example, when you make offers to people for work, you always make a commitment to pay them net euros monthly, not the gross, the net. That's all they're interested in. I don't think it's that unusual in Eastern Europe, but certainly in North Macedonia, it's the net that you commit to in euros, even though they've got their own currency. There's a fixed exchange rate, so, as an example. Another example which got me a little bit was being a former communist country. Most people used to work for the state, and when they changed their job, they moved from one part of the state to the other. So they're used to taking their unused leave with them. And although it's not a legal requirement, there's still an expectation when people change jobs that they can take at least some of their unused leave from one company to another. You don't have to do it, but it's just an expectation. It's a bit of a barrier which may stop somebody coming to join you as well. So, you know, we allow people to take up to 5 days leave, which has got to be documented. In these countries as well, there's a lot of paperwork. You know, they have paper for just about everything. And, okay, I find that a bit frustrating and unnecessary, but working with people, all I did was just hire an office manager who knew this stuff, and it was just normal, and just let them get on with it, and so on. So another aspect, sort of on the positive side on the culture, because I just want to focus on that a little bit more, and I'm going to, again, pick on Macedonia. As an environment, when you get there and you understand what it's like, you can see that particular environment is very focused around the family. The family is really important. And for us to be a great place to work, it was really important that we come across as an extension to their family. We become a family as well. And so we do things to really bring their family in to us. You know, we give private healthcare to the spouse and the children. We have a Christmas party for the children. When it's an employee's birthday, we send them a present. We send their wife a present, or husband a present. We send their children presents. It doesn't cost very much, but it really helps to make people feel part of the business. It's one of those things where you spend a little bit of money and you get a lot of value back, which I think is brilliant. But again, it's using the cultural difference in a positive way to really attract people and help them want to stay with you. I mean, our attrition is about 2%, which is great. So having 3 different organizations or teams makes things a little bit more complicated. So how do we make that work? I think it's really important that everybody within the structure, as I was mentioning earlier, they all feel valued. I think it's really important that you remember that everybody is a person. You know, everyone needs to feel valued, they need to feel listened to, whether they're working for you in your onshore team, your nearshore team, or the third party. If they're working on your project, they should all feel like equals, that they're listened to and they're valued. That's really, really important. And that really helps set the culture as well. Obviously, other things when you're creating a culture, hopefully you've got a great culture in your home base and it's very transparent, open, honest, and no blame and everything else. If it isn't, it gives an opportunity to maybe set that culture up in one of your new teams and then try and get that to filter through to the rest of the business. All the normal good stuff to try and get some consistency. Obviously, the other things which you need to be thinking about as well around process, consistent process, whether if you're using Scrum, the common Scrum ceremonies, regular steering meetings, just the governance overall, be consistent across everything, just to, again, have some guidelines around the way people work day to day. So really over the years then I've sort of fallen into this approach or been led into it as well in some ways around the needs the businesses have. But I think having the 3 team structures has allowed me to one, obviously protect the core skills we have on our home base. It gives me the flexibility to scale up and down. And also it's given me the ability to minimize the costs, because at the end of the day, the reason why you set up your own team near shore is to reduce costs. It's harder work, but you take out the margin that the third party would have. So you maximize your savings. Some of the sort of side effects of that too, having worked for PE-backed businesses, they loved the fact that we were investing and we created our own nearshore team, because it meant that their money that they invested in the business would be put to best work and would deliver the most value to them. So again, it works externally too. And I'm sure a lot of investors will be asking, if you don't have a nearshore team or way of reducing costs like that, they'll be looking for it too, because it's an obvious thing that they would think about. So I think that's all I was going to cover there. And I think we're going to have a fireside chat now.
Me again. Realized I forgot to introduce myself. So my name is Hannah Van Nostrum. I'm the Senior Content Production Manager for CTO. So I'll be moderating this session. And let's start off with Louise introducing herself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Louise May. I'm a product management specialist. So I've been a product manager, director of product manager, head of product management in a few organisations. And I now work for Product Focus, which is a product management consultancy. So writing training courses and consulting with our customers. And I met Iain quite a few years ago now when Iain was a customer of mine. No, the other way around. I was a customer of Iain's. So we were using Iain's resources to develop some software, which is why he invited me along here today. Nice to meet you.
So let's start off the conversation with what is the most important consideration when choosing a partner?
I'm going to start with this one, and I think that the word partner, I think, is really important in that question. So from a product management perspective, any outsourced relationship that I'm looking to have a genuine partnership with the people doing it. So I think from a business perspective, you need to be clear on what your objectives are. Are your objectives pure cost reduction and you want additional heads to deliver what you tell them to deliver? Or do you want a genuine partner relationship where you can benefit from the skills and the experience of the nearshore nation that you're partnering with? So for me, that's really important.
Okay, I agree with that. I think it's really important to have a good cultural fit with whoever you're working with day to day. And you need to work with a company you can trust. I mean, as a CTO, I would work with people who were recommended to me, people who I knew. You've got to know that they really understand how to build good software, that they really get it, because there are a lot of companies that don't get it, and I think that's really important. At the end of the day, when you use a third party, you may be outsourcing some work, but you're not outsourcing the accountability. You still got that, so you've got to make it work, otherwise it's on you.
So this is some great considerations to take into account, but what are the biggest challenges when setting up your own nearshoring team?
Okay, I'll start this as I've done it a couple of times. So the biggest challenge is starting, getting going. You enter into a country, you've made your decision to go to that country, won't necessarily go through that now, but why should people come and work for you? It's going to take a while, I think, to get good quality people who are coming to work for you for the right reason. I mean, if you go into a country and offer significant pay increase to attract people, then you're going to get, the hired gun who will then jump ship when the next company comes into that market and offers a lot of money too. That's not a good idea. That's what happened to me in Bulgaria when I set up there. I learned that one. I didn't think it was happening, but looking retrospectively, that's what happened. So, getting your brand across is really important. And one of the things that I did differently between my two setups in Macedonia, one for Allocate and one for myself, when I set up for myself, I hired a marketing manager. Now, as an R&D function, it might be odd to have a marketing manager working there, but her job was to build that brand in the market, to make it attractive. As far as I could see, a lot of that was buying nice stuff for the employees and taking photographs and putting it on social media. But, it worked. It got the message across. It's really important to build that brand in the market so people know about you and want to come and work for you. So I think that's the hardest thing is getting going, establishing that brand in the market.
Yeah, I think to follow on from that, I think once you've established that brand, like you said, your turnover is 2%, and that was really important for my team of product managers because they had really consistent Scrum teams to work with, and we had the outsourced relationship partnership with Iain, but we also had our own offshore team that was employed by the company, and we probably had better relationships with the nearshore team because they were closer for a start, but also because the turnover was so low, we got to know them better and then they stayed. So we really started to develop deeper relationships, and those relationships became more meaningful, like you say, with the family. Certainly one of my team, Paul, he used to go over there a lot, and he has met the families of some of his Scrum team, and he'd stay for the weekend if he'd been for the week and go cycling with them. And I think having the opportunity to develop those deeper relationships, I think made a huge difference, which previously in offshore relationships I haven't experienced that.
Thank you. So I have written down here, my question is, what do you see as the main differences working with a team in India versus Eastern Europe? But I guess maybe more than just differences, what are the thorns, what are the roses?
I think different people probably have different thorns and roses, don't they? And my absolute favourite thing about Eastern Europeans is that they're very outspoken. They say what they think. They're willing to challenge. Very well-educated, talented people who can add an awful lot of value to, from my perspective in the product team. Certainly the product owners were also part of the Scrum team, so the product owners were from Macedonia, and so we got a very, very, very good relationship between the UK-based product managers and the Macedonian product owners. We made sure that we visited each other regularly. We made sure that the product owners came over to the UK because it's a primarily UK-based market, so they really got to understand the users, the customers that we were serving. And I liked the healthy challenges, the robust discussions that my product managers had with the Macedonian, all of the teams. At the same time, we had relationships in India, And it was just a very, very different type of relationship. It felt slightly more subservient, which I wasn't keen on personally, because I like to think that there is challenge every step of the way. I think the only way we get better is if people are challenging us and we have a robust discussion. So I like that in particular was my rose in the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cultural differences between the UK and India or Macedonia or sort of Eastern Europe and India are huge. I mean, prior to setting up my own team, I was outsourcing to teams in Poland, and it was the same there. So I think culturally it's Europeans are Europeans, and they are willing to speak up. Obviously, there's the proximity with dealing with Eastern Europe, where people are maybe hopefully a direct flight away. I think it's really important that it's easy to get to, people who you work with, and cheap. Going all the way to India takes a lot of time and also expense, which sometimes budgets get tight and it can be difficult to get that approved in the business. I think culture is a massive difference, and the ways of working as a result. So personally, once I had started outsourcing to Poland, I stopped seeking maybe a lower per head cost in India. I mean, that tends to be the rationale that people have. You leave the decision to an accountant and they'll choose India every time because they'll just look at the per head cost. But it's not just the per head cost, it's the total cost of work. I know that we're twice as productive as our counterparts in India because we measure the data. We hire quality people because of the brand that we have in the market. In India, unless you're a Tata, we're pro. It's really hard to get the top people because that's where they all want to work. So, yeah, I mean, I know I'm probably biased. You know I'm biased. But even before I had my own team, I would focus more on Eastern Europe than India, just because it's the total cost of development at the end of the day.
I'll take a trip to either Macedonia or India, I don't mind. So we've started touching upon the cultural side of it. So how do you ensure consistency and alignment when you have multiple teams in different locations?
From my product manager's perspective, it was about us embedding ourselves in the teams. So the proximity was quite important, the low-cost travel was quite important, and we did get to spend a reasonable amount of time with the teams that we were working with. And I think that was probably the single biggest hurdle to overcome, is that proximity, getting to know each other, trusting each other, building those relationships, not just professional relationships, but we would go out for dinner with the teams. And when we did then have to have those difficult conversations, it was far easier because we had a strong foundational relationship to do that. It's also it's quite a personal investment from your employees, because travelling to see your partners, or even if it's your own staff offshore, it's quite a commitment, and so certainly my product managers were all very, very, very willing to travel, to spend time with our different partners, with our different employees in different countries. And it was definitely the more time we spent with different people, the better the relationship was and the more productive the relationship was. And that lovely rose that I love about Eastern Europeans being very blunt, it just means that if somebody was a little bit blunter than your average English person likes, then it didn't matter, because there was enough kind of credit in the bank to get away with that, and I really liked that. Also, having the product owners come over to the UK as well and really spend some time with customers and get to understand the market, that was very, very important for me, because to have a true product manager, product owner relationship, now whether you think there should be a product manager and a product owner, or whether product owners rule the world, is almost irrelevant. But I think if you're going to have that relationship, then there has to be an awful lot of trust, challenge, knowledge sharing between the two. And that's what the nearshore relationship enabled, because the farshore relationships are just too expensive. I think I'd also say about ring fencing the travel budget as well. I think there needs to be, as part of the expense of going near shore or far shore, there has to be a travel budget, it has to be ring fenced and it has to be spent. And I think it's too easy getting towards the end of the year when everything gets a little bit tight. The first thing that goes is the travel budget, and I think that's very, very short-sighted. I think that should be protected.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's nothing that can replace face-to-face time with your people, whether they're your people, your core team, your nearshore team, or your third-party team, or whatever teams you have. Getting people face-to-face, getting people to build those relationships makes a massive difference, because, you know, at times things can get difficult, there can be a bit of pressure, there can be some misunderstandings, and it's so much easier to resolve if people have formed some relationships first, because at the end of the day, these are all people that we're talking about. So I think that's critical to get that consistency. And also, you know, if you have opportunities, you may have to manufacture opportunities if you haven't, to plan together on things, to actually work on stuff together. Planning, problem solving, all those things together, ideally in a room, face to face, periodically, I think makes a massive difference to just try and get a common culture, way of working, and people who can collaborate easily and well together.
All right, so one more question before we'll start taking questions from our audience. So, Louise, you touched upon the different communication styles. They're a bit more direct. And you also talked about direct relationships. So we've talked about some cultural elements. I guess, are there any tips that you can give our audience about what you can do to align culture in the organization and some potential friction? And I guess that can be within your short team or teams that are based in London. I guess that can be within your short team or teams that are based in London, right? Any tips that we can walk away with? So, any tips that we can walk away with?
I think is embedding in each other's teams to start with. It may be that further down the line that the teams are more separate, but as the teams are being built, I think even down to the, not just the product side of things, even down to the developers, the testers, having some time together, whether that it doesn't have to be face to face, but certainly within the team and getting to know each other that way. And I think the cross-skilling, the upskilling, the understanding, I think the appreciation of each other's talents as well comes from spending time in the teams. And it also breaks down those initial barriers of the them and us, because even if they're employees of the organisation, if they're even just in a different office in the UK, then there's a lot of artificial barriers these days. And I think post-COVID, in this different way of working, I certainly think a little bit of job rotation and embedding in other teams is a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it's really important that we treat everybody equally. We listen to people, and we act on what people say, because everybody is important. And if we want to align culture in the organisation, sorry, you were talking about blending teams. That's what I was going to actually talk about, because I think that's really useful. And when I, for example, started my nearshore team when I was in Allocate, that's exactly what I did. So I hired some new people, put them into the new nearshore team, and I had them working alongside people from the core team. And that's a great way of getting going with the team, because it takes a lot of the risk away as well. So, people working together also allows you to do the knowledge transfer. And once you've got confidence, then you can let the nearshore team continue on their own with that particular product. We did that many times, and it's a great way of transitioning. It also got people working together on tangible things. So that was really good. Another interesting side effect that I saw when we set this up, the company I was working with then had a number of people who've been working with the company for maybe 10, 15 years. I think they're all still there now. And had been doing the similar job. They were real experts in their technology, but they'd just been doing a similar sort of job. I think once we created our nearshore team, we hired a lot of very bright people, maybe younger people, enthusiastic. it sort of woke everybody up a bit because they learnt stuff really quickly and they were able to be productive really quickly. So that had an impact on the people in the core team. But also they had the opportunity to start leading things which maybe they didn't before, using that knowledge, that expertise, and being able to guide others. And actually many of them grew into leadership roles. They started doing international travel, which they'd never done in their lives, which I remember one person asked me whether they needed to pay for their own hotel room when they were on a business trip, which I thought was lovely. But you know, it just adds a dimension and adds life, and it just wakes everybody up. So I think I think there's so many positives from having this sort of a multi-dimensional set of teams. You know, the flexibility of the costs, and the positive impacts on the core team too. I think it's something we really need to think about as we start to scale up in the future.
Thank you both so much. All right, opportunity for members of our audience to ask any questions. I'll bring in the mic. Members of our audience to ask any questions. I'll bring in the mic.
Hi, thanks for that. It's quite interesting. Iain, you were talking about keeping your approach in the process of keeping your approach in the process with your core team and with nearshore. How do you manage that with your core team and with nearshore and far teams as well?
Well, I guess you need to have standards, obviously, and I think having a consistent governance process that sits across that as well really helps consistently. So having regular steering meetings, for example, every couple of weeks, which could involve all the teams together, watching what the other teams are doing. And also, potentially with some clients, we have showcases where every couple of weeks we show the whole company what all the teams are doing, and everyone speaks. That, I think, creates a bit of a framework, an umbrella, for giving visibility and ways of managing risks and issues and all those sorts of things. And then beyond that, there's the standard, we tend to adopt the sort of standard Scrum ceremonies, the planning, the retrospectives, and all the other ceremonies as a regular thing for the teams. And I think that, I think the governance is something which maybe if you're just working in a core team in an office in London or something, you might sort of play by ear a little bit more. But when you have a number of teams, I think creating a more rigid structure around that, I think really is really important. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Can I add to that as well? Being from a product management background, when you outsource technical resources, it's not just a technology project. It involves mainly product management as well, but also other elements. So certainly I would get the offshore, nearshore development teams involved in now how we're going to service this. So it wasn't just about writing the code and delivering the product. It was about thinking a little bit more broadly. We had very multinational team meetings on a Monday morning because at the time all the product owners reported into me as well. So I had all the team managers, product owner team managers from all the different nationalities came in. So it was a really lovely team environment, and they felt as much part of the product team as they did part of the technology team as well, and they were certainly as much as part of the decision making for that rather than just the technology, and I think that helped with the relationships and the mutual respect as well.
Fabulous. Any more questions? Yes.
Hey, you talked about your 3 different teams. How do you talked about your 3 different works? How do you go into which of the 3 different teams? How do you think about going into which of the 3 different teams? Or how do you think about that?
That's an interesting question. I guess looking at the skills is part of it. I guess there's always a temptation to give the new interesting work to the people who've been most loyal to you for many years. But if they don't have the skills, that might not be the best place to go. And that's quite a tough decision to make. And I think if there is a major, shift from perhaps a legacy monolithic product to something that's more cloud native, it doesn't make sense to give that to a group of people who are doing it for the first time. It's better to bring some experience in, wherever that is, who've done it before, burnt a few pancakes or whatever the phrase is, and maybe augment that team with some of your own people so they can learn and develop. from that experience. What I've done in the past, it's been a real mix, to be honest. Sometimes core products, legacy products, or the live product generating all the company's revenue. The best skills for those were the ones in the core team, and we just had to keep putting work that way, but also try to bring in some of the other teams, but perhaps our own nearshore team into that as well, and start moving some of the skills over there if it's possible. Again, if you look at Eastern Europe, if the tech is a bit old, you can really struggle to find people, because you won't find older skills in those environments, and it's a very competitive environment. So things to go into nearshore tends to need to be modern tech, because that will attract the best talent. It can be impossible to find people with older skills like VB and other things like that. So again, it's part of it is needs must. You try and share it out. You just try and keep everybody motivated as a good manager wherever that is, and just try and find the best way of delivering what the business needs. But every situation you need to think about.
I was very controversial in one of my partnership roles. The crown jewels of the main product were being rewritten, replatformed, redesigned, and I chose that the development team to do that would be the nearshore partner, not our own partner, not our own employees. The reason for that was because we needed a fresh set of eyes. We needed teams that were willing to really learn about what was needed and the customer. And I think if we hadn't been then scaling up, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But the idea was that the nearshore partner did the first kind of 6 months, and then we got our offshore employees, a second team on board, and then a third team on board. So the knowledge transfer was there, because you wouldn't want to kind of give the crown jewels product to a team of people that weren't employed by you. But for me, it made absolute sense to break new ground with a new team who were going to be a little bit braver, and then hand the knowledge over to our own staff after that. It wasn't overly popular in some corners of the organisation, but I think it was the right choice to make.
So what was your reaction, or what were your clients' reactions to the news that you were standing up an offshore team, positive and negative? How did you overcome any potential concerns that they might have had?
I can't remember any sort of negative aspects. So that particular company I've been talking about was selling into the NHS. I think we may need to look at contracts to make sure that was covered. We needed to think about GDPR and data and those sorts of things. So we needed to make sure we were able to do it. I think at the end of the day, the customers, the end users of the products aren't too bothered, as long as they're protected, their data is protected, and good quality products are produced. The other side of the equation is, in that environment, we were able to build more products, because what we were doing prior to that, we were shuttling teams between products. We'd have one team working on a product for a few months, then we'd have to move the whole team to a different product and leave the other one alone, because we just didn't have enough people to work through all our products. Once we set up our nearshore teams, we suddenly were able to spread the skills, when we were able to have permanent teams working on each product, enhancing them, responding to the customer's wishes. So overall, I think it was a positive thing. We just need to make sure all the legal stuff was covered, really.
Somewhat in the same vein, but for a company who's never done outsourcing before, bringing in, so trying to convince an engineering team to do this sometimes is a bit of a challenge. Maybe the company isn't ready for it, maybe documentation tech isn't ready, but engineers ourselves will probably, it's happened to you, I'm sure, in the past with engineers who didn't want to do it, it's happened to you, I'm sure, core team wanted to do it. How do you deal with that? Is there any challenges to face with that? How do you deal with that? Are there any challenges to face with that?
Yeah, I've had to do this a few times. And one of the things I tried really, really hard to do, I didn't want people to be resistant to it, because if your teams at the end of the day didn't want it to happen, they can make it fail. You know, you need to find a way of actually getting, at least not necessarily be enthusiastic about it, but not be negative and destructive about it. So one of the things I did was to ensure that nobody lost their job because of outsourcing. And I think that's really important, because the first thing people worry about is their own job security. So if you can do it in a situation where you're scaling up, then and you can reassure them and actually hold that line and make sure all the management in your company know that that's the message you're saying, they buy into it, they agree with it as well, because it's a necessary message for people to get across to ensure that it's given a chance of succeeding. And then, you know, creating those relationships early, sending people from your onshore team to your nearshore team, getting them out there, making it a great experience when they arrive. One of the things that's really important, I think, it needs to be a place people like going to. They go there, they enjoy it, they have some fun. So I've always arranged things so that, you know, rather than people landing somewhere and thinking, I need some money, I need to pay a taxi, what if they take me somewhere and take my kidneys or whatever? You know, you arrange for a car to pick me. You know, people do sometimes think funny things. Arrange for a car to pick them up and take them to the hotel. They don't need to worry about money or anything else, just make it easy. You know, make it a great experience, and then give people money, budget to go out and drink and, you know, have some fun too. Eat food in restaurants and make it a positive experience and give people the opportunity to grow as well. I mentioned earlier about people taking sort of leadership roles. Most experts like to share their expertise with people, and if you can find the right people who are really up for that and give them an opportunity that they didn't have before, they can see the positive sides and the benefits. And obviously you've got to just try and keep it positive throughout. If people see this as the first step for getting fired, then people will slow that down. The very first time I did this was, I mentioned Shanghai in 2001. In that particular business, we had about, I can't remember, my team was about 150 people. I think we must have had over 50 contractors in the UK, really expensive people. I transferred the best to be permanent. I let go of the others. They were contractors. The permanent people weren't too bothered because they were all a bit jealous about how much they earned anyway. And then used a model where I sent people out to work in Shanghai and built teams around them as my method of transferring that knowledge. And I had loads of volunteers because it was, you know, an exciting thing to do. We paid for their accommodation for 6 months. It's all about making it easy for people and seeing what will make it attractive for people to really embrace the idea of what we're trying to do. You need their buy-in.
You mentioned earlier that in terms of de-risking the nearshoring, that you would recommend that first of all you partner with somebody in a nearshore location that you're interested in before you actually go and then set up your own office there with your own employees. And I think it's de-risking it because you're learning from your partner, but also I think it's showing that the partner's employees are your flexibility, they're your overflow, so that when you then go out and set up your own office, then I think people can be a lot more confident that their jobs are not going because there's the flexibility of the partnership relationship.
We have time for one more question.
Hi. Could you share an example of a situation where it didn't work out, where either distribution to the team didn't work out, or the setup that you had, whatever it was, didn't work?
Okay, I do have an example of that, which was, I mentioned Bulgaria. So I'd set up in Macedonia already, and things were going really well there. And I was a little bit worried about us being able to scale that particular team large enough. So I thought, oh, let's look at another location nearby. And Bulgaria's on, you know, there's a border. You can drive from Skopje to Sofia. It takes about 3 or 4 hours. Easy to get to. I thought the cultures were similar too, because the language is very similar, the food's very similar, so they must be similar, right? Wrong. The cultures are very different between the two, and there's a bit of friction there now. There was some friction there too then. The people we hired, and this is where getting going is really, really important. The first few people we hired, which were recommended to us by the company that was helping us, they were the hired guns. You know, somebody coming in for looking to be paid well, talented architect, but then they looked to create their own little fiefdom, and they weren't very collaborative. They were also quite arrogant, these particular people. I'm not mentioning this would be the case for anybody from that country, but these particular people we ended up with were quite arrogant. It's really hard, actually, to interview somebody from a different culture and actually read what they're really like. You know, you can assess their technical skills, but you need somebody from that country, I think, to interview them, to assess their cultural fit. Because we do it all the time with you know, people in this country. You can tell what they're like, but somebody from a different culture speaks a different language as their first language. It's really hard, and that's the case happened in Bulgaria, really. We hired the wrong people. We grew it for a while. I think we took it to about 20 people. I then decided to let go of the guy who was in there at the beginning. I thought was the cause of the trouble. Hired a manager who seemed okay to start with, but then he ended up going down the same path. And after I left that business, they wound up, and I was already planning to do it anyway. So it just hadn't worked. It's so hard to start, and getting the right people in at the beginning is so important. Another thing that I've done in these countries, sometimes people say start with hiring the management, and then build the teams below that. I think that's quite a big bet on somebody. And in these former communist countries, sometimes the management style is a bit old-fashioned. So, you know, we like the servant leader type management style, where the manager is there to help people be successful. Sometimes you get the opposite approach, where their job is to just tell people what to do and be more important than everybody else. And what I did when I set up in Manchester, Macedonia initially, we hired good technical leaders, good skills, and then we grew their management skills from there, and then promoted people into management roles. Once they really got into the culture, we could see that they would be managing the right way. So I think that's another thing to think about. I wouldn't start with hiring a manager. I would hire people just below that with skills you can properly measure, and then grow management from that. Okay.
Fabulous. Well, round of applause for Iain and Louise.